what to do my seminar on, so that I could do something different. So, it's not like redundant all the time. And I thought about all the flooding that we had in 2018 and how it affected the entire northeast part of the country in 2019. And I came up with the idea of adapting to change. So, if you think about it, you have to adapt to change every single time you go fishing, right? But you have to adapt to, obviously, seasonal changes, and then you have to adapt to weather and water changes, but it goes a lot deeper than that, so I thought that'd be a good topic. So that's kind of what we're going to cover today, and I would encourage you all to ask plenty of questions. We might spin off on a little bit of a side tangent or whatever, but, I'll answer your questions the best I can. So, something comes to mind, stick your hand up, we'll cover that. If I say something that's confusing, point that out. But other than that, I'm going to talk about, what I do to deal with changing conditions. And it can be a river, it can be a lake, it can be any body of water. So the most logical place for me to start is with what kind of weather we've been having this winter. I'm a big winter fisherman. I love fishing in the cold part of the year. And the perfect scenario for awesome winter fishing is the kind of weather we've been having, where you have 3 or 4 consecutive days or slightly improving days of weather. So that third day, you're more than likely going to have very good fishing. That fourth day, it's going to be, real good, especially if there's a front coming in that's going to shut it off. Like, I'm a big tournament fan of tournaments, and I follow the Elite Series pretty close, and, they had the first day of their tournament was scheduled to be Thursday, and it was supposed to be like a high of almost 80 after a week of stable conditions, and then last night, of course, was a full moon, so, there was probably going to be some huge push of spawning fish to the beds, and these guys were probably licking their chops. And then, of course, we got tremendous high winds and a huge cold front, and now we've been watching it out here all day today, and they're just pulling teeth trying to get bit. So that's what happens to us as well. So if we can have 2, 3 days, 4 days in a row, we're going to have really good fishing. Look at your nighttime temperatures as well when you're looking at that, because the first day of that trend can be a little misleading. You want those night temperatures going up as well. That's really important in the winter. So if your nighttime temperatures have been in the 20s, and then like Monday of this week was 60-something degrees, really Sunday night was pretty cold. So Monday sort of started it, but Tuesday was really day 1. Wednesday was really day 2, and Thursday was really day 3. And if you talk to anybody that fished Monday or Tuesday, they didn't do real well for that reason. So look at your trends, and when you're on the water in a situation like that, your first deal that you're looking for is protected, off the main current type of areas. And it doesn't have to be real deep if you're river fishing, which most of us fish the Susquehanna out here. Winter fishing doesn't necessarily mean that you're fishing real deep. My best winter fishing this year has been in 6, 7, 8 foot of water. But I look for areas where I've got something blocking that current, okay? And when I'm early in that warming trend, I'm talking finesse fishing, and I'm sure if you guys have been involved with the seminars, I'm sure all the guys have talked about, like fishing a TRD, which I'm sure everybody in here knows about. But, just a little TRD, a small little 2.5-inch tube. Finesse, slow presentation. You know, a lot of times, you know, January, February, you know, you're fishing water temperatures in the mid to upper 30s. You know, like last week we warmed up to like 44 degrees, which was incredible. But a lot of times it's, you know, 33 to 36. So aggressive fish are eating small finesse baits. And along with that, light line. You get a lot more bites in those conditions on 6-pound line, for example, than you will on 8. Now, adapting to change, if you're lucky enough to get like we had last week where it jumped up to 44 degrees on the 4th day of that trend, that's when you put the TRD and the spinning rod away and you get out the jerkbait. And we use lots of jerkbaits. As you can see, we'll have 3 or 4 boxes like that in the boat. Why? Because we have to match conditions. We have to adapt to that change. So, you know, to simplify things for you, and this is going to hold true in a lot of the baits and techniques that you use, color. You know, I get asked all the time, man, what's the best color? What's the best color? And a lot of times it's not like, there is not like a secret type color. But if you look at a couple of baits here, you know, we have a bait called Ghost Minnow, obviously because you can see through it. And we have a bait called Chartreuse Shad, which you really can't see through. So I call this a ghost style bait, and I call this a painted bait. So I like to start with this on a slightly overcast or a gray day, and I like to start with this on a real sunny day. Clear water given. You know, cold. Usually your cold water is really clear, unless you're having some runoff. And then you have to adapt to that change as well. So think about that color. Now look at the size of these baits. The colder the water, like when you're in that 30s, high 30s, you know, generally speaking, you don't want to go much bigger than this in your jerkbait. And a lot of times, if it's real cold, you're going to downsize. Okay? Another adaptation that you're going to make is your retrieve. You're going to do a lot of dead sticking. Now, if you're fishing in current, there's even a smaller, 78. If you're fishing in current, a lot of what I'm going to do is this bait, I might make a 30-second to a minute-long cast. So my current flow, my cast is never going to be anything more than straight out the side of the boat at a right angle to the current. And most of my bites, I'm going to time that bait up so that when it makes that swing, it's right where I think those fish are. And most of my bites are going to come right there. And I'm going to pop it, and I'm going to let it sit there. And it's just picture it just sitting there in the current, just like you were trolling it almost. And it's just sitting there like this. And I might let it sit there for 30 seconds. Doom, doom. Just dead stick it. They'll come up and eat it. And usually if you get one to eat it, it's every cast then for, you know, a short period of time. You might catch 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And they kind of get wise to you. And then you got to kind of move around and find another little wad of them. So, you know, that's just an adjustment from real cold, the beginning of your warming trend in the winter, to the very next day. And knowing, even though I caught 30 fish the day before on this, knowing that I'm hopefully not going to even pick that up. Making that game call to go to the jerkbait, and then seeing if I can make that jerkbait work. Because if I can, it'll completely outfish this bait. Size and numbers. Okay? So that's an adjustment. That's making an adjustment. Okay? That's adapting. These aren't my jerkbaits, so I better put them back in this box. So that's a cold weather, winter time little adjustment right there. Any questions on anything there? Good on that. Your jerkbait now? Let me just tell you something about a jerkbait.
George.
Yeah.
You use suspending or floaters?
All suspending. Yeah. Question was about, are my jerkbaits suspending or floating, which is a great question. And I'll take it one step further. Not only are they suspending, but especially cold water has a different density. As that water warms up, it changes in density, and your bait will change. So I test it by the side of the boat. I pull it down there and get it down by the side of the boat, throw some slack on it, and if that bait rises up on me at all, I'm going to put a suspend dot underneath the chin of the bait. So, let's elaborate on that for a second. So right here, in this zone right here, I'm going to put a little suspend dot, which is a lead sticker. A little dot of lead on a sticker. They're made by Storm. They're called suspend dots. Back in the day, we didn't have all these amazing suspending jerkbaits that we have now. You can go out here in the store and you can buy jackals and mega basses and Lucky Crafts and Strike Kings and Rapalas and whatever brand you like. They make an awesome suspending jerkbait. Back in the early 90s or so, we had like Smithwick Rogues. Not much else. And they didn't suspend real good. So we weighted them. And we used a lot of suspend dots and suspend strips, which are larger lead decals. So if that bait comes up on me, and you always want to pop it when you're testing it. You always want to pop it. Okay, why? Because these things have a weight transfer system in them. Obviously, I picked up a silent one that doesn't, but there's one out of the box of 50 jerkbaits there. But if you look at your jerkbaits, any one of them, it'll either be a BB. Here's a good one you can see through. It'll either be a BB or something of that nature, to where you can see how they go to the back, so that when you cast them, you get great casting distance. And then when you jerk the bait, they roll to the front, and the attitude of the bait changes in the water. So you can't tell if they're perfectly suspending unless you jerk them and get the weight transfer system in it. And then, if they want to rise up a little bit, then is when you bring them in, you dry them off, you get one of your suspend dots out, and you put it right underneath his chin there. One little suspend dot usually will dial them right in. And then as that water warms up and we get into spring season and we're throwing a jerkbait, that may be enough to cause it to sink. So then we'll have to take it back off again. Okay? It's not as critical in other seasons as it is in that cold, cold water. In cold, cold winter water, it is absolutely critical. When you hear people talking about catching them really good on a jerkbait, they're dialed into these subtle differences. 10-pound line versus 12-pound line. You're probably going to catch more fish on 10-pound line most of the time in the winter. Okay? Just because of that diameter difference. You can also adjust your sink rate of your baits by changing to heavier hooks. You get the picture. We can talk about I can talk about jerkbaits for 2 hours, no problem. I've done it, trust me. The retrieve on the jerkbait, because this is something that's extremely important. The retrieve on the jerkbait is the easiest thing to describe and the hardest thing to do if you're not a good jerkbait fisherman. So when I work a jerkbait, if you can picture pointing your rod tip at the water and picking a target and popping your rod and reflexing back to that same position. See how that rod tip just is bouncing back? So when I pop that, I feel that line get tight, and I let the rod recoil was the word I was searching for. I let the rod recoil back. Okay? That is the difference between catching fish and not catching fish. Sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? Most of you who don't fish a jerkbait will do this. Obviously rod tip down, but you'll go. twitch, twitch. So your rod went from here to here. This is 7 feet long. We just moved that bait quite a distance. Right? I'm going, my bait's going, doom, doom. My bait moves 6 inches. And each of those twitches is independent of each other. Because I pop it, I throw it back. Obviously, I throw slack in my line. I pop it, I throw it back. Obviously, I throw slack in my line. Then I leave that slack in my line. Pretty simple, but key. Okay? You know, you don't want a real heavy rod for that. You don't want a real light rod for that. You want just a standard fast tapered rod, medium to medium heavy power, depending on the brand. I like a medium heavy rod in the Loomis, old school MBR, which is a fast taper rod, and that might equal a medium in some other brand like a St. Croix. But you don't want a real soft rod. Okay, and obviously you don't want a real heavy rod because you'll lose a lot of fish. But the stiffness of that rod in jerkbait fishing is extremely important.
What's preferred length?
That's a great question. Gentleman asked what's the preferred length. For me, 6.5 feet. It's the only 6.5 foot rod I carry on my boat. Back in the old days, that's all we fished with was 6.5 foot rods. And then we went to 7 foot rods. It's like, oh my God, this guy's using a 7 foot rod. Well, that became the normal. Well, the problem with jerkbait fishing, you know, you're working that bait down. You know, you can really get to where you're hitting the water, hitting the boat, you know. So some people do jerkbait fish very successfully with a 7 foot rod. I'm big on a 6.6 rod. It's kind of a throwback thing for me because it's what I always use. I use what's called an MBR from G. Loomis, which stands for Magnum Bass Rod, which is an old school fast taper. None of this extra fast stuff, although you can use that. What I prefer. And I do an excessive amount of jerkbait fishing. I fish my jerkbait year round. The rod and reel I have for jerkbait fishing has never had another lure tied on it since the day I bought it. I'm serious. And I got more than one of them. Because I got a problem. But we'll talk about that another time. For real. So, I kind of got hung up on the jerkbait thing there. I didn't want to talk forever on a jerkbait, but it's a passion of mine when it comes to cold weather fish. Because it will produce a bigger fish. A jerkbait will produce a bigger fish. You heard guys say in largemouth fishing, flipping a jig catches a bigger fish. A jig catches a bigger fish. I don't know why a jig catches a bigger fish, but a jig catches a bigger fish. You know, and in largemouth fishing, you know, I built my career around flipping a jig, swimming a jig, doing everything you can possibly do with a jig. Well, in smallmouth fishing, I've built my style around what I call power fishing, which is covering water with moving baits looking for active fish. Okay, I'm not a big spinning rod finesse fishing guy. A 10-pack of tubes lasts me a long time because I don't use them. A bag of Z-Mans, although I carry a couple bags with me, they last me a long time. I use them a lot when I have to. Okay? Another one of my cold weather baits, and oddly enough, a lot of these baits, I'm talking cold weather, I use year round. But another one of my cold weather baits is the swim bait. And I know Mike was probably talking about this, but either the Kitech or the Jackal swim bait in cold water in the 30s. Now, when it's really cold, coldest fish I caught this year was 32 point something. I put a picture on Facebook showing my graph, showing my fish. It was 32.6 or something. And I caught a lot of fish that day and the next day in 32 and 33 degree water. It had warmed up. Okay? It was day 3 of the warming trend. It was 22 degrees in the morning, and the wind was blowing 30 miles an hour, but it had warmed up. And I caught them by dead sticking that. So, putting it in their face and making them eat it. I found them on electronics. Okay? graphing deeper water and marking fish and saying, well, those are bass. I don't know if they are or not. And then fishing for them like they were bass and making them eat the bait. And, you know, I talk a lot about expectations when I'm fishing. You know, what's a good day? I don't know, that day was a pretty good day. I caught 5 fish. But it was a good day. Because most people caught no fish or 1 fish. That was what the day was going to give you. So have a reasonable expectation. Don't be too hard on yourselves when you're trying to implement some of these strategies. You might catch 10 fish and you might have had one hell of a day. That could be your best day, you know, because that's what the day is going to give you. Now, if you come back into the ramp and you're talking to some of your buddies and they all caught 60, then you have to make some adjustments. And that happens. Don't let your feelings get hurt. So I'll fish this bait in very, very cold water, but I'll also fish it in year-round. But I'll fish it as a swim bait in warmer water. And one of my adjustments and adapting to change is going to be a seasonal change of late summer to early fall. And this bad boy is going to come back into play pretty importantly then. So, cold weather, enough of that. So, moving on to another seasonal change, which is the pre-spawn. Okay? So pre-spawn is like a wide period of time. It's like the end of winter up until when fish spawn. Well, fish spawn around here from the end of April until the middle of June. So you can have a lot pre-spawn. You can also have spawn and post-spawn at the same time you're having pre-spawn. You know what I'm saying? So one of my most favorite conditions is fishing on the Susquehanna River during the pre-spawn / spawn period, because I'm going to have 3 or 4 waves of fish spawn on the Susquehanna River. I'm going to have fish spawn in April, May, twice, and June. A lot of years, not every year, but it's not uncommon. I've seen them on the bed 2 years ago. I saw them on the bed the year before it got real high. I saw them on the bed in July. It's odd, but it happens. So you go out. You're fishing islands that have the current deflected off of them, well-defined pockets. You know the fish are going to spawn there. You go from pocket to pocket to pocket to pocket to pocket to pocket. You're catching fish all day long, and they're all this big. You should have made an adjustment way earlier in the day because those bigger pre-spawn fish are nearby there. They're within eyesight of where you are. So making, you know, this seasonal change might be just as simple as backing off and looking for submerged current breaks in the form of, say, grass beds or ledges that these bigger fish are stacked on, waiting for that magical signal to move up to spawn. And that whole spawning process is like 12 hours, by the way, from the time they move up, spawn, and move out. So you're trying to hit a 12-hour window. Good luck with that. Go buy some scratch-offs. You have a better chance of winning those. But you got a great chance of winning the pre-spawn staging areas. So start at the spawning areas and work out. Perfect example would be upper river, 5-foot height. You know where the fish are spawning. It's still early. The grass beds aren't up. But if you can read water, you can read where grass beds are going to grow, because the sandy humps that they grow on are still there. And it's nervous looking. You look out across there, you're like, look at that little patch of nervous water, you know, as big as half them chairs back there. That's a grass bed. Why do they stage there? Because on the backside of that grass bed, the river water flowing over this comes over it and it does this underwater. And it digs. So it's a drop off here. So if I'm standing here on top of the grass bed, it might be this deep, and here it might be this deep. So the current's coming over these fish's heads. They're not fighting that current, and there might be 4, 8, 10, 12 big pre-spawn females staged up here, They're going into that cove, which is that corner of that room back there. That's where they're going. They're here now. So I'd rather look for that wad of fish, and then another one of those, and another one of those, and another one of those, and maybe a rock ledge. Maybe this row of chairs that Sam's sitting in is a rock ledge underwater. Now I look at that on moving water, and I see a consistently jagged surface going usually on a diagonal across the river. That's a rock ledge. You can't see it because it's underwater, but you can see it if you read water. You can see that it's nervous here and nervous back there on usually about a 45-degree angle going across the river. It's plain as the nose in your face. Same thing. The back side of that is a current break. It's underwater, but if you fish it the same as a rock ledge that's sticking out of the water, just picture a big row of boulders going to hoys across the river like we have out here in Columbia. Each one of them big rows of boulders is a rock ledge. Now put 4 foot of water on top of that. Still a rock ledge. It's just underwater. It's still blocking the current, right? So, if that's working, the only tricky part is controlling your boat. Now, a lot of you know what I'm talking about because you're going to have a hard time relating to this. And it ain't easy. So you're going to have to use a combination of your trolling motor or an anchor, or if you have like a shallow water anchors like talons or power poles. So what I'll do is, okay, so we got our little spawning cove right here. This is our shoreline coming down through here, and we got our little underwater grass beds and our little rock ledge. It's like a good spot right here. Okay, so these are where these fit. This is, just picture this. Current coming down, parting. Okay, so these are where these fish are located. This is an extra special sweet one here because see what happens when that current gets to the top of that? It doesn't part right here, it parts up here. This is called the push. This is where Big Mama lives. Always. It's also the hardest spot to fish. Look at this. Behind this grass bed, and then there's another one behind it, so we get that push right there. And then we get more here. Now, how do I control my boat? My boat right here. Believe it or not. How do I control my boat, which is wanting to be drifted down the river by the current? So I can use my trolling motor, and I back my boat down the river, right? I use the trolling motor to stop or slow my boat. So as I'm standing on my trolling motor, I'm casting up here, and I'm fishing that, and I'm fishing all that out, and then I just kind of let my foot drift back, and I get on that trolling motor again. So the guy on the trolling motor is working pretty good. But when you're on the back of the boat kicking your buddy's butt, have a little pity on him, because he's up there making that. You get first crack at everything. You know, when you're back there all proud of yourself, you know, dropping the hammer on them. Well, I got a little equalizer for you. I do things a little different. I got what they call a spot lock trolling motor. So I just hit my button, and my boat just sits right there, and then I fish like you fish. But I take it one step beyond that. Because for, you know, submerged cover fishing like this, boat control is everything. I also use what's called power poles. And I use a technique where the less noise I make and the less disruption I make, the more fish I catch. When I'm on that trolling motor, those fish feel and hear that noise. It's a big river, but it gets a lot of pressure. They are conditioned to that. Well, if the trolling motor's not running, they're also got a brain about that big, and they forget pretty quick. That's why we catch so many of them. So I drop my power pole, one, and let my boat pivot to this position. Not a good drawer, am I? Then I drop my second pole. I know, he's bad. Then I drop my second pole, so now I'm tacked and tacked. And now I went from fishing here to fish in here. Okay? Then I pick them up, kick my bow with my trolling motor. As soon as it starts to get to here, I do it again, and I do it again, and I just walk down the river. Always bow down is where I always end up, so I walk it, drop the poles. Walk it, drop the poles. And I dissect that area, okay? And you'll be the only one doing it because it's not easy to do. And you'll be watching every one of these hard islands and every one of these shoreline nooks, and it'll just look like a merry-go-round of boats running through them all day long. And they're all catching dinks, and they're all like, where's the big fish? Well, maybe they'll move up later. We'll hit them later. And they're all out here, and we're catching them. Now, how are you going to fish for them? You know, without getting terribly bogged down on it, you may be able to power fish for them. That's obviously the way we're going to try. So in the springtime, we change our tactics. We're still throwing our jerkbait, but in the spring we get a lot of rain, we get a lot of runoff, we get a lot of dirty water, and our jerkbait's not always the best in that. So now, there's a trick here. We're going to start throwing the chatterbait. Okay? And this is a beast of a smallmouth bass catching machine right here, especially in cooler spring-type conditions or dirtier, higher water. And let's talk about dirty water for a minute. You guys all remember 2 years ago when we had a raging mud hole of a river for the whole entire summer? That was a little too dirty. But that summer, personally, my fishing was, numbers-wise, was as good as it's ever been. Maybe better than most of the time. Now, I wasn't fishing the river too often. I was fishing tributaries or portions of the river that had a tributary washing in and giving me a little color thing. But it was all about the jig. The bladed jig and the flipping a jig. The jig and pig. Not a smallmouth bait, you say? I beg to differ. Why? Because it has a bulky profile. And in the spring, when that water's kind of high and gray and dingy, this is giving this is giving them a profile that they like. This right here is going to be cover water, fish through these areas. Now, if I come down through those areas and I catch 2 or 3 fish on this, I'm going to assume there's a lot more than that there. And while, though, I may not like picking up a spinning rod, I will. Because my next pass down through there, I'll probably throw something a little less aggressive. Probably throw a crankbait. I like a lot of browns and oranges, especially in the spring. I like an orange belly. I like some orange and some brown. Something dark, red. Throw a lot of red. A lot of browns and orange. I know there's fish there. Let me come back down through with a crankbait. If I get even more bites, now I'm starting to picture and put it together. And I'm going to go back through that area again, and I'm going to slow down to the point where I'm fishing a finesse bait. Because I know there's enough fish there to warrant that third pass. And as those fish become, it's kind of like, you know, you got so many fish there and you fire them up and you catch a bunch of them with a chatterbait. And then you go through there with something a little less aggressive, like a flatter-sided crankbait or a little square bill crankbait. You don't catch as many. They're sort of catching on to you. And then that third time you go through there with your spinning rod and your finesse bait, and you catch, you know, several more. But they're quality fish because you found pre-spawn fish. You adapted to the fact that all the little bucks were up on the bank. So that's a scenario for the spring. And I kind of have to give you the Cliff Notes Reader's Digest version here because I want to get through the whole year. Do I have any questions?
I got one.
Sam.
Below the dam, fishing the bay, the river, and the...
Yes.
below the dam,
Yes. Yes.
river there. Where would you set up for post spawn or pre-spawn fish?
Okay, so down
Tony's
there,
landing area.
one of the most important things is current. And that current's generated by the dam. So that current can be pretty violent. So you want to immediately look for areas off of that current. Now, early, those fish will start spawning down there at the end of April. Early, I want to have, like, the western side of the river. I'm getting a little more sunlight exposure on that side of the river. My water's going to be a little warmer on that side of the river. Now, down there, we have a lot of grass growth. So I'm preferably going to have some grass associated with the area that I'm looking at. Smallmouth will adapt to grass just like a largemouth will. As a matter of fact, they seek it out. And they act a lot like largemouth. So I'm going to start west bank early. I'm going to start looking for cleaner water with current being pushed off of it. Maybe a point up here that juts out. And these eddies don't have to be real wide. They can be a narrow eddy. Your boat will be in the current, but you're fishing the seam and the quiet water. And smallmouth are a little different than largemouth. A lot of times when they're in that spawn phase, they'll be in the current. They want a little water in their face. So keep in mind when you're fishing the eddies like Sam's area down below the tidal water, in the tidal water Susquehanna, or up here. You know, you'll hear us talking a lot. You'll read reports and you'll hear the guides talking about the fish wanting a little current in their face. So what we're referring to there, and what I'm describing to Sam, is, say, a point on the shoreline. Okay? Here's our shoreline. Here's our water. Here's a point. So that water is going to get thrown off here, and it's going to come down, and this is going to be calm in here. Okay? And then the water is going to get back on the bank here. A lot of times those smallmouth, even that are very, very close to spawning, will be right where you're going to put your boat so that you don't have to stand on your trolling motor the whole time. So they're right underneath your boat. They like a little bit of current in their face. How do you know? Start out a little farther and fish that seam. So my seam, my current's coming here. My current's coming here. So my water comes down here, hits here, and then hits here. So this is my seam. Okay? A lot of times with smallmouth that are pre-spawn, that are very close to going to spawn in this protected bay here, they will be right here. They like a little current in their face. They're a more aggressive fish. A smallmouth is the guy that chases you down the street, beats you up, and steals your wallet when he mugs you. The largemouth hides in the shadows and waits for you to step into the alley. So they're out here. They're fighting. They're eating. They're very aggressive. So start here with your boat and fish this seam.
I've always found that smallmouth act more like trout.
Well, river smallmouth especially. Now, a lot of it's deceiving, the amount of current they're in, because the rock on the bottom can deflect enough water that a fish can be in very fast water but not be in very fast water. And if you're trout, that's a great comment about trout fishing. If you can relate to trout fishing, you're a really good smallmouth fisherman. You're also a very good tidal water largemouth fisherman. We use a technique all the time that we call trout fishing, where we float the bait in underneath the cover, just like we're trout fishing. You know, there's a lot of similarities there, okay? So that's kind of, Sam, to answer your question. When you get into that May full-blown spawn period, then, you know, those first areas are not nearly as important as your better areas. So you can go to the other side of the river and, you know, big flat banks, huge flat banks are what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. You know, with an underwater drop out here. They'll stage on that drop and move up. They'll be up on it. They'll be up there to feed too. You know, smallies feed very, very heavily before the spawn, and they're looking for crawfish. In the spring, smallmouth are looking down. In the fall, smallmouth are looking up. Okay, so they're feeding crawfish, bottom darting minnows, and whatever, little catfish or whatever the heck's down there, but mostly crawfish. That's what they want. That's a big, and they seem to know that. You can catch a springtime smallie, squeeze their belly and feel the shells and the hard, and you can smell them, smell their breath, and you know when they're eating crawfish because it's disgusting. So when you see us out there sniffing their breath, it's like we're just confirming what we already know. And a lot of times you'll see them sticking out of their throat. And in the fall, a lot of times you just see a shad tail sticking out of their throat. Okay? So in the spring, they're looking down. They're feeding on crawfish. And you can tell. You can feel it. You can smell it. When they're really gorging on crawfish, as soon as you swing them out of the water, you can smell it. It's just a pungent smell. So that's going to be like a springtime thought process there around the spawn, and that period's protracted. And another really good thing that you have to look for is your fact that your water's rising and falling all the time. And when it's rising, those fish are going to move from here to here. Once that water gets up, you know, if you're fishing up Harrisburg way and the river's 5.5 foot, this is their playground. If it's 6.5, 7 foot, they're moving to the bank or a hard island, a hard cover break. You want to talk about fish movement? You want to talk about adjusting to changes? River smallmouth move like nobody's business. And that kind of is one of my notes. How did I put that?
When they move to an island, which part of the island will they hang out at?
They'll be on the front, the sides, and the back. The biggest fish will be on the front.
Yeah.
On the sides, because an island is just like a shoreline. So this could be our island here, right? So this is going to be your side, right? So if this is a hard island right here, biggest fish, right? Your side eddies, like if this is a little point right here, we're going to have a little eddy right there. If it's big enough for one fish, it'll hold a fish.
I know.
You know what I mean? So when they go to those islands, don't rule out. If you get a bigger side eddy, like right in here, most of the fish, and then of course the tail eddy. So the front, the sides, and the back.
So you're still looking for quiet water.
Looking for seams. Always looking for seams. The only reason I'm fishing the islands is because the flow has increased to the point where it's pushed them off. And if it hasn't pushed them all off, it's too much flow to fish. It gets to the point where you can't fish it. Bigger ledges that actually have rocks sticking out of the water, that rock acts like an island. So you can fish that. Then those fish will gang up on those mid-river spots like crazy. Another area that smallmouth in the spring will move to in mass on high water is tributaries. And they will go in there by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And right hand up in that peak flooding conditions, we had 4 people in the boat one day and caught over 450 fish out of a tributary.
Now, you say a tributary, that means like an incoming creek.
Yep. And they'll go up them. They'll go up them for miles. We've been 10 miles up them already catching fish that don't live there. Because there's just too many of them up there to support that habitat. So but that's extreme conditions. You know, we probably won't see flooding like that again for that duration for a while. Considering that was like the second time in 30 years that we saw it. Right? So your water movement is a big change. I wrote up there, water changes. And in river fishing, that's every day. you almost should have, men in black come up and flash you. And so your mind's erased for the next day. So you can start over again. Because, I remember so many times fishing on Saturday and murdering them, and Sunday the river rose a foot and it was muddy there. And they were gone. They vominosed, and we're hanging around there for an hour trying to relocate these fish. Because we didn't adapt, which we do adapt now. Might want to check underneath your seats. Now, I was hoping for a full house. Obviously, I'm not drawing the big crowds like the other hammers were.
You got 25 people watching on here.
Well, that's cool. I didn't even acknowledge our friends online. Got any questions? Fire away, guys. Glad you tuned in. Reach under your seats and check around your seats there. Got some stuff taped up underneath them chairs.
Bubble gum.
Yeah, no, the gum's free. And those stickers are for you too, that I put on your chairs. Look around, there's 2 of them. There's 2 of them underneath there. 2 $10 gift cards.
George, you should have waited and then we all put chairs away.
Yeah, there you go. I'm putting you on my executive seminar committee for next year.
Did anybody find them?
That's hard to believe. There's 2 of them.
I don't know.
I just figured we'd just have, like, boom, boom.
Boom, it'd be done.
I watched Mike put them underneath the chairs.
I think it's a trick. He's just
All right, well, I'll make sure we get 2 before we're done.
George, question. Like right here at the bridges at Columbia.
Yeah.
Where you have the old bridge and new
Yeah.
bridge.
Yeah, that's like 2 islands.
Well, how would that's going to relate the same way and stuff?
It's going to fish exactly like, you're going to have a bridge abutment, which is an island. And then you're going to have a bridge abutment, which is a current break. And you're going to have peak holding areas.
You talk about the pile lines, right?
Yep. You're going to fish it exactly like you would fish an island. You're going to fish it exactly like you would fish a submerged grass bed. You can see it because it's obviously a bridge pier, which is basically an island. Now, what's happened in those situations, because they've been there forever, and there's 2 of them, the tail end of the first one on almost every one of them has silted in so much that it's basically created one big island. So you don't really get much of a holding area behind them. Now they will, especially in the late spring and summer, in that dead slack water behind grassbed islands and hard islands and piers, that shallow, dead slack water, there will be a big bruiser up behind them. Not on every one of them, but on enough of them to make it worth your while.
At what time of the year?
Late spring through the whole way through the summer and into the fall. Those, like that really dead slack water, usually got them little water spiders all over it, behind one of them grassbed islands or behind a hard island or behind a bridge pier. You're like, those fish aren't way up in there. They're not, but there's probably one up in there. He may not be on every piling, but he'll be on enough of them or enough of them grass beds to make it worth your while to check it out. And what they're doing is they're up there cruising around for crayfish. And what's the best way to catch a shallow water fish like that that's cruising around with crayfish? A topwater. Who said that? Because you'll never catch them on a crayfish or a tube or a TRD. Never.
Why? Yeah, why?
If I knew that, I'd probably go buy some scratch-off lottery tickets. But I'll tell you what, you throw a topwater up there, and when it's real still and quiet, you throw a riser bait up there on your spinning rod that you can cast a country mile, Look at them little tiny trout hooks on there. You should see what a 20-incher looks like on that thing, because we've caught dozens of them behind them islands on that little bitty bait. So that's something that happens a lot late in the season. I call it the Labor Day pattern. But always have a riser bait on a spinning rod, and I bomb them things as we're working our way down the river. I fish a lot upriver. Late spring, early summer, there's like them grass bed islands. They're just hundreds of them. Some areas just have hundreds and hundreds of them. So every one of them is a potential target for in the backside. And I always make a cast or two with this bait.
Do you go across?
The big deal is to cast as close to the grass as possible, or the back of the island as possible, and just swim that thing real quick. Don't worry, you'll see the boil and the wake coming like a Jaws movie. That's how that works. The other thing you can throw up there, especially in the summer, is a walking bait. Spook style walking bait. I like one a little bigger than this.
I had good luck on that.
Corbin doesn't have the right one in his box. I don't have anything in my bag because I got all cold weather stuff.
George, you talking this big?
No, not quite. Like I like a giant dog X from Mega Bass. A little bigger than that. Yeah, that or even a little bigger than that. But this is great for that too. This is especially in the summer months. Again, in the summer months, you know, the grass beds are a major player. I'm sure all these guys today talked about grass beds until you're blue in the face. But in the summer months, they're a major player. But even when they're not, they're going to hold a big fish. It's a random fish. You gotta hit them all because that one fish is worth it. And if you hit enough of them, and you catch 4 or 5 of those fish, it's not the pattern, but man, was it ever a great day. You probably could have caught many, many more fish doing something else. And you should also do that. But that random big cruiser. And it's, you know, it's to throw at every grass bed around you for an hour and not even get a sniff, and your buddy's fishing a swim bait or something out on the flats catching fish, it's hard to do. But when you catch one, that's just a little oddball kind of a, that's like an oddball kind of a nature of a smallmouth. They just kind of do that.
What about like a plopper?
Yeah, whopper plopper is a good choice for that, but not in that real quiet, still water. So the whopper plopper, as everybody is, I'm sure knows about the whopper plopper, is a phenomenal topwater for smallmouth bass. Absolutely phenomenal. In that real shallow, quiet water like that, it's too much. I want that little riser bait. I want that walking bait and a popper. A popper. So rolling through the summer, we're fishing grass beds, we're fishing ledges. One thing that we're doing to adapt to the change of that season, just one key. I just want to point out one key. I don't want to go into the detail of summer fishing. The hotter it gets, the shallower you go. The hotter the water gets, the hotter the summer gets, the longer the summer gets, the shallower you go. Okay? By September, the Labor Day pattern, you're going to be fishing water that you can barely keep your trolling motor in. When you got it jacked all the ways up. Stuff that you can run through on your jet boat, but you can't float back down through it again. Shallow. And those fish are crawfish feeding. And those crawfish come out to eat the grasses, and they're out walking around, and those smallies are laying back. And you'll see, if you are observant, you'll see wakes and stuff here and there of bass attacking crawfish. And that's what they're doing. And it's really peaks out. Because if you think about Labor Day, it's super hot, usually 90, 100 degrees out. The water's usually real low, so you want to go real shallow. Your top water, your walking bait, and the fluke. I'm not going to have time to get into the fluke here. You think I can talk about a hard jerkbait? A brother can talk about a fluke. Because I will fish a fluke from the time the spawn's over until fall every single day. I probably go through 60, 70 bags of flukes a year, easy. Okay, we'll talk fluking one-on-one. A fluke, a walking bait, and I like to say things that are controversial. And the best time to topwater fish is when? 10 o'clock on, baby. 10:30 on is your topwater time. The brighter the sun, the hotter it is, the more fish you're going to catch on topwater. The lower the water is and the clearer the water is, the better. Now, is that to say you're not going to catch fish at that magic hour? Of course you are. Those are aggressive fish. You can catch them on a topwater. You can catch them on a spinnerbait. You could probably catch them on a swizzler if you rigged it up right. They're just on the feed. You got the magic hour in the morning and the magic hour in the evening. I'm not discounting that. But pay attention this year to your topwater fishing and see how it picks up. And why is that? Who told me 10:30 midday? You. Why is that? Smallies are sight feeders. Smallies are sight feeders.
And with the sun overhead, it brings
Smallies want to see. I learned that years and years and years ago up on Lake Champlain. Man, them cloudy mornings, overcast days, I'd be like, oh my God. I get my Zara spooks out and go out there and throw them all day long. And the old smart guys back at the dock were like, yeah, you should throw a spinnerbait, man. Smallies only eat when it's sunny out. And it's true. So, that adjustment, adapting to that change of the season of late summer to early fall, Labor Day pattern, go super shallow. Throw a fluke. Throw a walking bait. Don't get too small, 4.5 inches. Super Spook Junior, Giant Dog X from Mega Bass. You know, take your pick. There's excellent topwaters from every hard bait company out there. They all just have beautiful baits that work phenomenally well. Go with your confidence. One-on-one, I can break down tackle for that. I just you know, Will's giving me the signal here, and you know, I'm just getting warmed up. Yes, sir.
What do you do in the summertime when there's clouds of mayflies floating down the surface?
I usually quit early and go to the bar. And that's a phenomenal question, one which I really like. Yeah, when you come out here to Columbia and put your boat in the water on Sunday morning, and there's a million carcasses of mayflies floating on the water, prepare yourself for a difficult day. Why? Those fish gorge themselves all night. They gorge themselves. Now, one of the things I'm going to do, because you know I got a solution for everything, I'm going to fish near and around overhanging cover. Why is that? Because where do the mayflies roost after they are spawned and did whatever they do? They pile up on them tree limbs, and them real heavy hatches of them big mayflies, those tree limbs are bowed over like this. I remember Pete Gluzik telling me, I was out with him at the FLW Championship on the Three Rivers. He was out there fishing it. I wasn't. I was doing test drives in a boat. But he told me his pattern was to pull up on the bank, and he asked the tournament director about this, and throw a jig in the tree and dislodge about 1 billion mayflies, and then pick up a popper and fish around that area and catch a couple 12-inch fish, because that obviously was a tough tournament. And that's what I will do. I will fish areas where I notice an abundance of mayfly hanging, because they're like zombies at that point. They're basically done, but they're still alive. And they're hanging on those tree branches, and sometimes there's so many of them, the branches are just bowed over. And they're falling in the water, and those fish are down there. It's like carp eating mulberries that are falling off a mulberry tree. And are you going to have a great day? Probably not, but what did I say at the beginning of this thing about expectations? You got to have reasonable expectations. I spent a lot of years as a guide, and I used to always tell my clients to have reasonable expectations. Some days we had really good days. Some of the biggest tips I ever got were on super tough days because we caught fish. Okay? So you gotta expect, what's gonna happen. Like, be within reason. If you outkick your coverage, man, you had a great day, right? Any other questions I can answer? We got some time.
The
Yes, sir.
Jackal riser, what weight do you use?
It's one size fits all. It actually sinks.
Oh, they
It's
only
a top
make-
water
they
that
only make
sinks.
one size?
It's got a metal lip on it. As soon as you start reeling, it pops up on the surface and it just kind of dances like this. You just reel it, wind it in.
Oh,
Fish
they
on
don't-
a spinning rod with
Oh, they
braid.
don't make different sizes, huh?
Well, they make a bigger size, but it's a totally different bait.
Oh,
I fished that bait. It's one of one.
okay.
Yep. Yes, sir.
What area of Lake Champlain do you like, and what time of the year is your favorite for up there?
So, Lake Champlain for me is two lakes in one.
Yeah,
It's one of the greatest smallmouth fisheries around. I usually fish it later in the summer and early in the fall. So I guess I'd have to say that's my favorite.
okay.
But I was up there a few years ago on a business trip with Shimano. They took us fishing up there for a few days. And we were up there right during the first wave of the spawn. And I literally saw a giant bay that was basically devoid of fish that we went through with a jerkbait looking for spawning fish. And we came back 2 hours later, and I literally saw 400 smallmouths cruising in that bay. So sometime in that 2 hour span, they came in. And we just caught them till our hands were bleeding.
A lot of spots up there. You go there, there's nothing, you go back, and there they are.
Yeah, the two things about Champlain that you have to understand is, first of all, it's 125 miles long,
Right.
and it's got a heck of a current,
Right, a lot of current.
a wind-driven current. And who knows what else, Nessie or something has something to do
Sometimes the
with it.
wind is blowing one way and the current's going the
Exactly,
other way.
especially, I've seen it already, like where the narrows are,
Right,
what they call the gut. I've seen it blowing from the north between islands so much that when I drove my boat through the gut, I went downhill
right.
because the water was stacked up and running through the gut.
Yeah.
When you see that, that's current, you stop, you fish it.
Yeah.
Why? Because smallies like to be in the current. Why? Because they're aggressive. What happens when you do that? You catch a lot of fish.
It's the extreme current there sometimes.
Yeah,
You go
it can
back
be
a
very
few hours
extreme.
later,
And remember, on that lake, sun,
Right,
top water, sun, smallies, sun. If it's cloudy and ugly out, get a frog out and go catch you some largemouths. I fished the whole thing from one end to the other.
yeah,
In
for
tournaments, I've run from one end to the other.
sure. I fished the gut for about 15 years.
Yeah, me too. Yep. Yes, sir.
All right, talking about the 3-day change.
Yes.
The news 8 has warmer. Tuesday's going to be our warmest day.
Exactly.
On my water gauge, we're peaking on Sunday.
The height?
The height.
At what?
8 at Harrisburg.
It's a lot of water.
So, with the 3-day trend, Tuesday it's looking like we're going to be back down at 7.
Okay, so I take it you're used to the upper river. You know your way around up there a little bit. Yeah. So 7 and 8 foot of water is a lot of water, but it's perfect for like the western shoreline of the river. And that high water, like it's probably it was probably no more than 5 foot most of last week, going to 8. So the flow is going to basically double. Okay? Those fish will move, but not much. But the fish that are wintering up near the bank will go up onto the bank as if it was spring. So, I don't know about you, but I'm probably looking at taking off work Tuesday. Because that's going to be money.
Even though the water's coming down.
It's still going to be high. It's still going to be high, so they'll still be... And don't forget, we're in the winter. These fish are in a winter pattern. Okay, they don't move a lot. The reason that they are where they are is because it's safe from water like that. Remember I said at the beginning, they want to be where the water's off of them. My best fishing I've been doing all winter has been in like 5 to 8 foot of water. And it's been an area that has a shoreline with a parallel ridge.
He's still
It's about 2 foot here. It's about 6 foot here. This ridge turns and makes a ledge. It's 8 foot there. They're never going to leave there until it's time to go spawn. They got everything they want. They're protected from current. They can follow this ledge to this trough to get up against a bank in extreme high water. There's a point right above them. It's just like, if you can it's kind of like scouting for a place to put your tree stand for a deer. If you can figure out his bedding area and so on and so forth, you know, the channels where they're going to go through, you know. And that's why that's a good scenario. And look at your nighttime temperatures as well. Don't forget that in your winter fishing. I'm telling you, you get 3 days, the third day you're catching fish.
Oh, you mean 3 days of warming trend?
Yep. And warming doesn't mean warm. It means that it's warmer.
Warmer.
Yeah. You're still going to want to put all your clothes on. You want to talk about winter fishing? He's got the right jacket on right there. Insulated. I got to stop talking. People all over the world are yelling at me right now. Now, Mike, there is no coupons under any chairs. They flipped every chair, and my man back there is on our committee next year for setting up and tearing down, because he come up with the best idea of anybody.
Well, thanks, George.
Thanks, everybody.